This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
An urgent international conference called in Berlin to discuss the Libyan conflict. Hope for South Sudan's peace process as rivals Salva Kiir and Riek Machar meet ahead of a February deadline. And Iran says it's made arrests in connection to the downing of a Ukrainian passenger plane. You're watching Africa Live, coming to you from Nairobi. I'm Lindy Mtongana, and with me is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Kenya's president has reshuffled his cabinet. He's unveiled new economic targets as well. And Egypt and Ethiopia hope for a Wednesday deal on the filling and operations of the Grand Renaissance Dam. But can they do anything in the next 24 hours? We'll have some answers for you in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, we start with the latest on Libya. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had strong words for General Khalifa Haftar following his departure from Moscow without signing an open-ended ceasefire. As the heads of opposing sides, Haftar and UN-backed Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj traveled to Russia to potentially cement a truce. Haftar refused to sign the agreement, stating he needed more time to review the deal. President Erdogan, in his statement, repeatedly called Haftar a pushist, a person who takes action against people in power. Russia's foreign minister struck a more cautious tone, stating Russia would continue efforts to broker peace. A Berlin summit scheduled for Sunday will look to establishing peace between the warring factions.
As you know, during the visit of the Russian President Vladimir Putin to Istanbul on the 8th of January of this year, Russia and Turkey put forward an initiative of a ceasefire in Libya. To develop this initiative, Libyan representatives met yesterday in Moscow, along with ministers of defense and foreign affairs of Russia and Turkey. We will continue efforts in this direction. So far, we have not achieved the final result.
In the coming days, we will carefully monitor the choices that will be made between Pushist Haftar and the legitimate government of the country. If Pushist Haftar's attacks against the people and legitimate government of Libya continue, we will never refrain from teaching him the lesson he deserves.
Erdogan not mincing his words there, while the African Union is also joining efforts to foster dialogue between the rival factions. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy has more.
The chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, says the AU will hold a peace conference for Libya on the 25th of January in Brazzaville, the Republic of Congo. The AU hopes that the UN-backed Government of National Accord and the Libyan National Army will attend and agree to a truce. Mr. Faki says it is important that the warring parties allow for humanitarian access to reach Libyan citizens. The conference on the conflict in Libya that was planned in 2019 did not happen. South Africa, the incoming chair of the African Union for the year 2020, has pledged to assist Libya in finding an inclusive solution that is African-centered. The African Union is, however, concerned by what it calls external influence in the Libya crisis. Libya's warring factions have failed to agree to a peace deal at negotiations in Moscow, and now Germany says a summit this Sunday will provide another platform for deliberation on the Libya crisis. Libya has known little peace since the ousting and killing of its former leader, Muammar Gaddafi, in 2011. Coletta Wanjohi for CGTN in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, Egyptian authorities have made two unusual announcements since the start of the year. This as the country staged massive military drills near its border with Libya. The location of the drills indicates that Egypt is indirectly responding to Turkey's decision to send troops to Libya. Cairo has made no secret of seeing this deployment as a threat to the country's national security. Here's Adel Al-Mahrawi with more.
يعلنون عن أنفسهم.
The armed forces men present themselves. That's a quote from a propaganda video about one of the biggest military maneuvers the Egyptian army is holding. Its name is Capable 2020. It's the second domestic major military exercise announced since Turkey declared willingness to send troops to Libya.
This is a military threat because they are Turkish troops being moved to Libya. Therefore, the Egyptian Armed Forces restructured its military alert plans and its troops preparations, and that was evident in the Capable 2020 drills. The purpose of these exercises is to show that Egypt is capable to face any military threat.
Egypt usually announces joint military exercises with other nations. It is rare to make an announcement about a domestic military event. Written in English, the unusual posts indicate that the Defense Ministry is targeting international audience with this campaign.
What's new about these drills is that they included all strategic fronts of Egypt at the same time to emphasize the readiness of our troops to face threats coming from these borders. It's also to make sure that the army is ready if it becomes necessary to resort to a military intervention.
Videos of Capable 2020 can be seen all day long on Egyptian local channels and online. A collection of the latest purchased military hardware is seen in action, from submarines, helicopter carriers and fighter jets to commandos battalions, in a comprehensive display of the Egyptian military's might.
Wars now depend on joint maneuvers, meaning different forces engage in a military struggle harmoniously together. Egypt has in recent years upgraded its military hardware, which now adopts the most advanced military technologies and systems in the world. That change happened in all departments. To use this equipment in a live ammunition training shows that the army is mastering their use.
It is clear that Capable 2020 is designed to show that Egypt is willing to do anything to stand against the presence of Turkish forces in its western neighbor Libya. What has made that even clearer is the announcement of Libya's Eastern Parliament Speaker from the Egyptian Parliament that if necessary, they're willing to ask the Egyptian military to intervene. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, staying with the Libyan conflict, in the latest development, Berlin has announced the participants to a scheduled conference on Libya to take place on Sunday. Let's get the details now from our correspondent, Adel Al-Mahrawi, joining us live from Cairo. Adel, of course, it's expected that Egypt will be one of the key players involved in this Libya conference on Sunday. But tell us about the other participants and what they might bring to the talks.
Well, at least 12 countries are expected to be participating in that Berlin conference. The invitations from Germany has been sent to the summit level, meaning the heads of states or representatives from their governments. The 12 countries include Russia, the United States, Germany, of course, Italy, France, Turkey, Egypt, Algeria, Congo. So basically it's a coalition of regional powers, international powers, and some of Libya's neighbors. And each one actually fills a gap within this complicated equation of foreign intervention in Libya and foreign interests, of course. So together, these are countries that have been supporting, whether directly, whether in public or in secrecy, one of the rivaling parties in Libya. Some of them have actually been violating the UN's arms embargo, fueling the civil war inside Libya and trying to support who they believe is the righteous group to lead the country. In any case, it is quite an important and considered to be the first of its kind to get all these powers together on a table to discuss. But the matter of representation is quite important.
Indeed, of course. And of course, the question also remains, Adel, whether or not Berlin can achieve what Moscow failed to achieve. What's the reaction in the region to the fact that Khalifa Haftar wouldn't sign the deal?
Egypt, for example, believes that militias in Tripoli must be controlled. They must surrender their weapon. Although no official statement has been yet released from Egypt regarding Khalifa Haftar's decision by leaving the Moscow talks, going back to Benghazi without signing any of the ceasefire agreements. Yet the position is quite familiar. In general, people want to see calm, and this is a general support. They want to bring both parties together. But in terms of clear reactions, even from the Arab League, none has come out so far, at least regarding the latest updates coming out from Moscow. But the gathering that is expected to take place in Berlin is quite a thermometer or a sensor of how these countries want to see change. They want political transition. They want to see political negotiation between these rival parties, and they don't want to see extremists or puritanical groups rising to power in Libya. So it is quite complicated, especially that within Libya itself, these parties do not want the other. Neither the militias, the Islamist militias who support Fayez al-Sarraj, the internationally recognized government, want Haftar to be part of a transitional government, nor Haftar want to see these groups rising to power, and so does some of the countries that support Haftar, for example.
And of course, the Turkish president did not hold back in his response to Haftar's decision not to sign the ceasefire deal. Do you think that the Turkish president will live up to this warning if Haftar resumes attacks on the GNA, or is this warning enough to deter any further attacks from Haftar's eastern-based forces?
Despite that, Turkey's remarks today was quite surprising, more or less a threat to Haftar if he tries to resume his military operation over Tripoli. President Erdogan said that he would teach Haftar a lesson. And earlier, the Turkish foreign minister said that if Haftar does not sign the ceasefire agreement, then there should not be participation in Berlin conference is useless. So these are all indications to how Turkey has been frustrated from Haftar's move. However, will that deter Haftar? It doesn't seem so, because also Turkey knows that Haftar is not also acting on his own. There are nations that support him and are backing him, and therefore the threat is not just directly to Haftar himself, but also to these countries. And Haftar gains his power from these regional heavyweights that have been supporting him since this civil war began, and since he sparked violence with his declaration to march toward Tripoli and gain control over it.
Well, thank you so much for that update. Adel Al-Makhri joining us there from Cairo. Now let's move to Nigeria, where gunmen have killed 35 people and abducted over 50 others. The attack took place in Kaduna State, located in the country's northwest. Bandits started targeting communities on the 6th of January. CGTN's Phil Ihaza has more.
According to a community leader, Habila Sarakin Noma, the suspected bandits invaded 10 communities in Chikun and Birnin Gwari local government areas of Kaduna State. He said they called to demand a ransom of more than $276,000, approximately 100 million naira, for the release of the abducted victims. The attacks reportedly occurred on January 6th, but according to the villagers, the gunmen threatened them not to inform police or face another attack. No official statement has been issued by the government or security personnel in the state. Since 2015, Nigeria has witnessed growing violence from some suspected herders who now wield sophisticated weapons and ammunition. The Global Terrorism Index, GTI, reports that violence claimed the lives of more than 1,158 people and displaced more than 300,000 in 2018 alone. Another community leader whose village was not attacked, Jonathan Asake, visited victims of the most recent attack, urging the government to do more to prevent further attacks. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has promised to deploy more security to the region and to bring the perpetrators to justice. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
2 people in Guinea have been killed following anti-government protests. 18-year-old Mamadou Sow was killed during protests in the capital Conakry, while the other protester was killed in the opposition stronghold of Labe, the country's second largest city. Demonstrators in Labe ransacked and set fire to a courthouse. The Ministry of Security confirmed both deaths, announcing an investigation had been launched. Weekly protests started in October over a possible constitutional change, which could allow President Alpha Conde to seek a third term. Conde has yet to rule out running in the 2020 election. Iran has made arrests in connection to the accidental downing of a Ukrainian passenger plane. The move comes after protests in the country over the shooting down of that plane. Iran admitted to the accidental downing after initially denying responsibility. All 176 passengers on board the passenger jet were killed. A missile hit the plane during the country's retaliatory attack against the United States. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani announced a special court would be set up to look into the incident.
As soon as I discovered the crash was not normal and ordinary, I put in a lot of effort to shorten the investigation so that we know exactly how the plane crashed. It was a very painful and unforgivable error, and I immediately ordered the people in charge to inform the public.
France, Britain and Germany have formally triggered the dispute mechanism of the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. It's a response to Iran's gradual suspension of its commitments to the agreement. Iran, in turn, has accused the three European countries of failing to keep up their side of the deal, which was supposed to end sanctions.
We have to oversee the dispute resolution mechanism process. That's this letter asking me to trigger. I will guarantee that it provides an opportunity to address the issues indicated by the E3 on this letter and find a way forward to ensure full and comprehensive implementation of the JCPOA.
Dozens have been killed and many others remain trapped after multiple avalanches hit Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. Xinhua news agency reports 61 people have been killed, most of them in the Nile Valley area. The avalanches followed heavy rain that also triggered landslides. Several people are reported missing and feared dead as rescue efforts get underway. Officials say the death toll will likely rise sharply. More than 50 houses have been completely buried under the snow. You're watching Africa Live. More news after this short break.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Africa's Deputy President David Mabuza says he's confident of a breakthrough in negotiations on the implementation of South Sudan's peace deal. The number of states and their boundaries is one of the issues Mabuza is trying to help solve in his mediation trip to South Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports from Juba.
There is 1 month to go until the scheduled formation of a unity government in South Sudan. South Africa is mediating talks to try and end the stalemate in the implementation of the country's peace deal.
I've discussed with the parties that they express their opinions, their different opinions. My role is to persuade all of them to agree on a certain position.
The government previously refused a proposal to reduce the number of states in South Sudan, but Juba now says it is open to discussing proposals from other parties.
We want to form the government of national unity as soon as possible. This is what will bring the stability to our country. We are really very happy to the region for what they are doing. Very happy to South Africa government. The deputy president has been working closely with us since last year.
The East African regional body IGAD says it is working to ensure that a new government is formed in South Sudan by next month. It is also still negotiating with groups opposed to the current peace deal to end violence in the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
On January 14, 2011, former Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia, where he later died in exile just last year. In what was later considered the start of the Arab Spring, people took to the streets calling for freedom and dignity. 9 years on, some of the objectives of the 2011 revolution have been achieved, but many Tunisians are still waiting for change in the North African state. Adnan Chouachi has more.
9 years after the 2011 popular uprising in Tunisia, many people still commemorate this special day which changed the course of history in the country. Tunisia organized its free, fair and independent legislative and presidential elections in 2019. However, freedom is often described as the unique achievement.
The freedom of the press and speech are the main achievements of the revolution. In addition, the political transition is so far successful. The civil society is very active and unions are strong, yet there are many challenges ahead.
Many goals, mainly economic and social, remain unfulfilled. The unemployment rate is still high, and the purchasing power of the middle class has plunged in recent years.
Security is a daily concern. Economic and social problems have not been resolved by the successful governments. Freedom is precious, but we do not eat freedom. Everything is more expensive, like food, water, electricity, healthcare, and services in general.
In October 2019, the Committee of the Martyrs and Wounded of the Revolution had published the final list of the martyrs and the wounded. The list includes the names of 129 martyrs and 634 wounded, but the final list has not been published in the official Gazette. Over 3,000 youths who suffered physical injuries in 2011 are still calling for justice. Many say they are not concerned about the implementation of Decree number 97 on the victims' compensation.
I'm not here to celebrate. I'm sad because those who killed or injured civilians are still free. They should be held to account so that we can turn the page and move forward.
In 2011, many policemen died in the line of duty. The Interior Ministry said it will seek to secure the right of its staff and to have them listed among the martyrs and the wounded of the revolution. Tunisian President Kais Saied has promised to realize the key demands of the revolution: freedom, work and dignity within what he described as the framework of the constitution and with legitimacy. However, the Secretary General of the Labor Union has warned against a second revolution if the state does not fulfill the economic and social demands of the people. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has just concluded his tour of Africa. Minister Wang jetted into the continent on the 6th of January and visited several countries where he held discussions touching on issues such as trade, peace and stability on the continent. CGTN's Penina Karibe brings us the highlights of Minister Wang Yi's trip.
It's been a tradition for the Chinese foreign minister to visit Africa for the first overseas trip at the beginning of every year. And this year, during Minister Wang Yi's annual visit, he explained why Africa has been the preferred destination over the past 3 decades. Minister Wang explained it is based on the special feelings of friendship from generation to generation between China and Africa. Wang said the tradition is also based on realistic needs of deepening cooperation and common development between China and Africa. The third reason, he said, is the important mission of strengthening international cooperation and safeguarding common interests between the two sides. All of these reasons were demonstrated in Minister Wang Yi's visit to the countries he went. In Egypt, Wang called for deepening the strategic partnership between China and the League of Arab States in upholding international peace and justice and promoting the political resolution of hot regional issues.
I think from his visit in Africa, apart from just trade-related issues and investments, I think he's been able to touch on new areas which basically are security-related issues that are helping Africa realize its dream and achieve African Vision 2063.
The topic of trade and development was also firmly on Minister Wang's agenda. In Burundi, for instance, Wang said China is willing to carry out mutually beneficial cooperation with the country under the framework of jointly building the Belt and Road and implementing the 8 major initiatives proposed at the Beijing summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, with a focus on agriculture and infrastructure construction.
As far as infrastructure is concerned, I think that's the backbone of all this investment that China is taking in this African continent, helping Africa achieve its connectedness and achieve its African continental free trade area objectives. And these objectives can only be achieved if there's a very strong foundation as far as infrastructure is concerned, as far as economic growth moves forward.
Zimbabwe was the last stop for Wang Yi, where he called for sanctions against the country to be lifted, saying they have no basis under international law. Restating Beijing's commitment to providing economic and diplomatic support, Wang said the sanctions infringed on Zimbabwe's legitimate development rights and interests. Wang's support comes as 16 countries constituting the Southern African Development Community spearheaded calls last October for the removal of the sanctions.
I think it's the confidence that China is giving African countries. I mean, once you build that confidence, especially in trade-related issues, then those countries can start now looking into their internal affairs and see what it is that they can do.
In recent years, the achievements of China-Africa cooperation include the establishment of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, reaching consensus on building a community with a shared future, and the joint construction of the Belt and Road, all of which have brought groundbreaking influence on China-Africa relations. Penina Karibe, CGTN, Nairobi.
And let's now go to Raman Yang for your latest business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Kenya's head of state has reshuffled his cabinet. He also unveiled new economic targets. And Egypt and Ethiopia are hoping for a Wednesday deal on the filling and the operations of the Grand Renaissance Dam.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let us start in East Africa, where Kenya's president has reshuffled his cabinet and announced the government's economic strategy, at least for the next few months. Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta confirmed Ukur Yatani as the country's finance minister. He effectively replaces Henry Rotich, who was arrested on suspicion of financial misconduct last year. As acting finance minister, Yatani won some praise for taking very tentative steps towards reining in government spending and a growing debt burden, currently over $60 billion. Following the announcement, President Kenyatta also highlighted growing concerns about rising debt, sluggish revenue growth, corruption, mounting job losses, and a general slowdown in economic output as seen in the third quarter GDP data. He's also urged the central bank to use all tools available in its arsenal to curb predatory lending and to boost affordable credit, particularly to SMEs. Kenya ended a disastrous 3-year experiment in interest rate caps last November.
The implementation of the law was expected to lower the cost of credit, but also to increase access to credit. Unfortunately, the law had the opposite effect on the economy and reduced the amount available for credit. The removal, therefore, of the interest rate cap in November last year will facilitate the availability of more credit to businesses, which it will in turn increase the circulation of money. And at this point, I urge the Central Bank of Kenya to use the full range of instruments of regulation and policy at its disposal to prevent predatory lending and to ensure that banks can offer loans at affordable interest rates.
Now, officials from Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan are meeting in Washington, D.C. at the moment to try and resolve the long-standing disagreements over the 6-gigawatt hydroelectric dam that Ethiopia is building across the Blue Nile. Now, the three nations aim to strike a deal on the filling and the operations of the dam by the 15th of January, basically in the next 24 hours. Here's Kate Fisher with this report from Washington.
Ministers from the three countries are meeting here in Washington after talks in Addis Ababa last week ended in deadlock. They're aiming to resolve the long-running dispute by Wednesday, a deadline they agreed to after a meeting in Washington in November with US Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and World Bank President David Malpass. The dispute over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has sparked a diplomatic crisis between Egypt and Ethiopia. Both countries see existential threats in each other's positions on the project. Cairo fears it will restrict supplies of already scarce Nile waters, water on which its population of more than 100 million people is almost entirely dependent. Addis Ababa denies the dam will undermine Egypt's access to water, and it says the project is crucial to its economic development. It wants to become Africa's biggest exporter of power. During a visit to Pretoria over the weekend, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed asked South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to intervene in the dispute. But if no agreement is reached by Wednesday, the nations may go to an international mediator or get their heads of state involved in the negotiations. Kate Fisher, CGTN, Washington.
Quite a bit happening in Washington too, as China and the US are preparing to sign their long-awaited preliminary trade deal also in the next 24 hours. The US Treasury Department has dropped its designation of China as a currency manipulator. Here's CGTN's Nathan King explaining why that is significant.
As Vice Premier Liu He and the Chinese delegation arrived here in Washington, the US Treasury announcing that it is no longer calling the Chinese a currency manipulator. In fact, China's currency had only been on that list for 5 months at the insistence of US President Trump. 5 times before, the Treasury Department said no, the Chinese are not devaluing their currency against the US uncompetitively. And now it's come off. There were no sanctions put on China as a result of that list. So is that a sort of goodwill measure? Well, we'll wait and see. Remember, we don't know exactly what's on this deal. We know that the US has been talking openly about increased purchases by China, especially in the agricultural area, $40 to $50 billion a year, $200 billion over 2 years of all extra exports from the US to China. We'll see how those are detailed. We know that there's a talk of agreement on intellectual property, on market access for both countries, also currency. There'll be other things in there, but what won't be in there is some of the hard stuff that is being pushed off into phase 2. But the good news is that some tariffs have been rolled back, those big December 15th ones, which would have hit a lot of consumer imports into the US from China. But still, 2/3 of Chinese imports into the US are under some sort of tariff, even as we go into the phase 1 signing. So phase 2 has to be a lot about rollback of tariffs as well. We'll be hearing, we understand, from both delegations here on Wednesday at the White House. There is also a dinner planned before that, and also other engagements which we will be reporting to you all week long. Thank you. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Now, Boeing got a new CEO barely 24 hours ago. This was essentially a long-time coming. The company's new leader, David Calhoun, has served for years on the board of this aerospace and defense conglomerate, but he now faces a very stiff challenge to win back the trust of not just regulators, but airlines as well, and passengers like you, even as the 737 MAX scandal rumbles on. Here's CGTN's Giles Gibson with the latest.
It's been more than a year since a Lion Air 737 MAX plummeted into the sea off Indonesia's coast, killing 189 people. 157 died when another 737 MAX jet crashed in Ethiopia 5 months later. Earnings at Boeing fell a whopping 43% in the third quarter, and the MAX is still grounded worldwide. New jets filling up lots where Boeing employees usually park their cars. The company has also stopped production on the 737 MAX. Incoming CEO David Calhoun has to change that fast. Late last year, Calhoun told CNBC Business News the 737 MAX and its MCAS flight control system will fly again.
This control system will be fixed, and it will be safe, and it will have been tested like no other control system, at least in my history in the aviation industry. And this airplane will fly, and it will be safe.
His predecessor, Dennis Muilenburg, started the campaign to win back public trust before he was fired.
We are responsible for our airplanes. We are responsible, and we own that, regardless of cause. Any accident with one of our airplanes is unacceptable.
The Boeing 737 MAX 10.
But hundreds of recently released internal messages show some of Boeing's own staff didn't trust the plane, one saying it was designed by clowns who were supervised by monkeys. Investors are also still cautious. Boeing's share price has dropped almost 5% in the last 6 months. And it's not just Wall Street. Calhoun and Boeing have to win back the trust of airlines and their passengers all over the world. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
And finally, the Trump administration's tariffs on tech have come under very sharp criticism from organizers of the world's largest consumer electronics show, CES. They call the tariffs the worst economic mistake in a century. Now, even though, to be fair, CES did wrap up last week with thousands of products and services having been unveiled, the trade war left an indelible mark on the event. CGTN's Mark New explains.
At one of the world's largest electronics shows, CES, Chinese companies showed their products to global consumers. And that included companies like Huawei, which has been caught in the crosshairs of the trade war.
Nobody wins in a trade war. Tariffs are taxes, and CTA has been very clear that the trade war really is bad for everyone, China and the U.S.
CES's event communications director says the number of Chinese companies fell by about 5% from last year, but still more than 1,000 Chinese companies attended, eager to show off their latest innovations. One of those companies is TV manufacturer TCL. Despite the trade war, it steadily gained market share in the U.S. and is now competing with Samsung for the top spot. General Manager Sidney Sun says good relationships with the U.S. government and even sports teams have helped it thrive in challenging times. Do your products get hit by the current tariffs?
Yes.
They do.
Yeah, so currently I think we are supported by the government. We don't have any restrictions, etc. So we sponsor the local teams, the sports teams, and we have good relationship with the local community. So far we are good, but we also try to invest more and provide better products in U.S. market.
Some Chinese entrepreneurs attending the show refuse to let trade tensions put a damper on their opportunity to showcase their inventions.
The trade war maybe have some influence with our industry, but we say everything will become better in the world because we don't want to talk something about the government or the policy. We're doing the business, so everything's fine.
The world's largest computer maker, Lenovo, does business in at least 180 markets. The president of commercial PC and smart device business, Christian Theismann, says a diversified supply chain is key to navigating the turbulent trade situation.
Free trade is ultimately best for customers, best for consumers. But obviously, we are prepared. We have a global supply chain around the world, in every major part of the world. We are working through the current situation, but I think we are very well prepared.
The tech companies we talk to all have high hopes for a resolution of the tariffs, but realize they've got to be prepared to keep innovating no matter what the conditions. Mark New, CGTN, Las Vegas.
I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour at 1800 GMT. We're going to be looking at Nigeria's 2019 Finance Act. It's now formally in law. The government is looking to plug its budget deficit, and it's raised its value-added tax rate from 5% to 7.5%. It's still one of the lowest on the continent, however. Will it change anything? We'll find out live from Lagos at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, Chinese New Year celebrations kick off in Tunisia.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
African designers are showcasing the best of their creations at the Berlin Mercedes-Benz Winter Fashion Week, which kicked off on Monday night. 4 South Africans presented their collections at the opening group show. As part of an emerging talent program, they displayed a mix of materials focusing on sustainability and wearability. The aim of their designs was to bring an African story to the stage. This year's event has brought a contemporary look to the German capital. The event comes to a close on Friday.
So the collection I'm showing tonight is called Alkebulan, and Alkebulan is the oldest name for Africa. And so the reason I named it this and the reason why it's my inspiration is because I was trying to reimagine Africa without all the pain and all the pain and suffering that we faced. So it was almost like from a child's eye, a child being born and seeing things from the first time, seeing all the color around them, all the flowers and all the animals around them, and that's why you can pick up a lot of that in the collection. There's a lot of print and it's very vibrant. It's almost from a child's eye, even the proportions. So yeah, that's the inspiration.
This is inspired by the alchemical principles of as above, so below. And you can see within the coloring also, when you look at sulfur and mercury and salt, which were basically the base elements that they tried to mix together to create gold. So those are all precious stones and minerals mixed with a little bit of plastic that's upcycled, of course. I love that contrast, that like liminal line where is it acceptable to put like diamonds with plastic?
In that sense, if you look tonight, what we are showing you is a complete mix of what we're saying is completely current now fashion, but has come from 6 or 7 years of our collection. So it's not about this season, it's about many seasons that still are beautiful, still beautiful pieces. You can still wear them, they still look fantastic on the ramp. You can not even recognize that you ever saw them before. So for me, that's like the longevity that one should have in one's clothes, that you never say, oh, that was from last year, or that thing was from a season even.
And to Tunisia now, where celebrations for China's Spring Festival have kicked off in the capital, Tunis. The event brings together Chinese artists, dancers and musicians and provides a glimpse of China's rich culture and traditions. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports.
The prestigious theatre of the City of Culture in Tunis hosted the international performance. This professional show is organized by the Chinese Embassy in Tunisia.
The performance is organized in partnership with the Confucius Institute in Tunisia. The theatre is packed with very enthusiastic Tunisian spectators. We are encouraging mutual knowledge between Tunisian and Chinese people.
The Chinese troupe of the city of Nanjing took the audience on a journey into the fascinating world of Chinese culture through music, dance tableau, and acrobatic performances performed with agility and talent by the troupe's artists.
I have sung Chinese traditional songs in this beautiful country, but also a Tunisian popular song. I feel passion and happiness to share these songs with Tunisian audiences, in Chinese and in local dialect, in Arabic.
I'm playing the qanun instrument. Its tradition dates back to 2,000 years. This string instrument is common in China and Tunisia.
Tunisians from all walks of life attended the event. They shared the joy of this special period of the year.
It's a fantastic show. I've attended dozens of Chinese artistic performances. They're all different. It's part of this great civilization that brings people together.
This show, high in color and sound, was also organized in the coastal city of Monastir. It's part of the consolidation of cultural exchange between Tunisia and China and the strengthening of ties of friendship between the two countries. Many Tunisian municipalities intend to conclude twinning agreements with Chinese cities. Several artistic performances by the Nanjing acrobatic troupe will be organized on the celebration of the 56th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Tunisia and China. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Kenya and Rwanda set their sights on the African beach volleyball qualifiers for the Tokyo Olympics.